It's 5 a.m. in New York City. I'm Danny Berger with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know this morning. No signs of easing. The conflict between Israel and Iran continue to day 4. President Trump says the two may need to fight it out before a deal is reached. Touchdown in Canada. World leaders gather in Alberta for the G-7 summit as geopolitical tensions intensify. And all of that ahead of a big week for central bank decisions from the BOJ, the Fed, BOE, all on deck. It is a world where we are seeing more and more geopolitical shocks, but you would not know it from the price of oil this morning. In fact, we are down nearly 1 whole percentage point for Brent crude this morning. When markets first opened last night, they were up 5.5%. Not a lot of change in the price, perhaps because not a lot of change when it comes to disruption of oil markets. Across risk markets, you're also seeing a comeback from Friday. When you saw stocks fall more than 1% into the close on Friday, this morning we are higher by 0.5% for the S&P. For NASDAQ, we are higher by 0.6%. The move that does appear to be sticking is the move higher in bond yields. Across the curve, we have been moving up and will continue to do so this morning. 2.5% for your 2-year yield, 10-year yield at 3.7%. 4.43 is where we stand. 6 out of the 10 most traded currencies will see their central banks deliver results this week and rate decisions. Let's get you now some stocks to watch. Here with that is Bloomberg's Joe Easton. Good morning, Joe.
Hey, Danny. So we've got a really interesting move in terms of some management changes here in Europe. The CEO of Renault, Luca De Meo, swapping Renault Clios for Gucci handbags, moving over to Kering. According to reports over the weekend, we have got confirmation that he is leaving the car maker. We're waiting for Kering to confirm the news. But Kering stock up 10% in Paris and Renault falling as much as 8% earlier today, down around 6%, but that will be a bit of an ego boost for De Meo, seeing those stock moves as he changes jobs. Then over in a couple of others to bring you US Steel, this long-running saga, this takeover by Nippon, finally edging even closer following some extra approvals announced on Friday by the two companies. So that stock gaining around 5% in the pre-market. We'll be glad to see the back of that one when it does come. And then finally, one more to bring you. Cisco upgraded at Deutsche Bank, which reckons that AI trade is going to boost the company's margins. And as usual, check out the Before the Bell opening wrap on the terminal very shortly.
Joe, thank you very much for that, and we'll catch up with you later this hour. Also coming up this hour, we're going to be speaking to Lease CEO John Plueger live from the Paris Air Show, and Bob McNally of Rapidan Energy on the moves in oil, which have started to abate since the Israel-Iran attacks. Let's get back to that top story, though. The conflict between Israel and Iran now into its 4th day. No sign of ending. An Israeli strike in Tehran has killed another key military official, while Iran has fired several waves of drones and missiles over the last 24 hours. For more, we are joined by Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa host, Jomana Bersecci. Jomana, just given the contours of this changing conflict, does it seem like we're headed to something that looks protracted?
It certainly does appear to be the case, Danny. We are, as you mentioned, heading into the 4th day of the attacks and counterattacks between Israel and Iran. Those attacks intensified over the course of the weekend, with Israel hitting over 80 targets dotted around various sites in Iran, be they military sites, also defense sites, and then, of course, those nuclear sites as well, with the IAEA saying that serious damage has been sustained in that Isfahan nuclear site. So that is a key part of the nuclear program that Iran conducts, and that it is a uranium enrichment, part of the uranium conversion facilities that they have, and a key part of the program could set them back by several months. But in terms of the death toll, the latest numbers put out by Iran suggest that at least 224 people have been killed, including 6 very senior commanders within the Revolutionary Guard, and then alongside those nuclear scientists that were also killed on the initial wave of strikes on Friday. As for on the Israel side, they have said this morning, the Israeli military has said that Iran has fired over 370 ballistic missiles towards central and northern Israel, over 100 drones. Most of them have been intercepted by Israel's air defense system, but several of those missiles did actually manage to penetrate and have sustained damage, especially in Tel Aviv this morning. The death count there going as high as 24. So what we are seeing is a continuation of this back and forth between the two sides. No signs of de-escalation. The Israeli Prime Minister saying that they will continue to strike at every site and every target of the Ayatollah regime, and the regime itself, the Ayatollah, saying that they will continue with their harsh response. And also worth pointing out as well, Danny, that those sixth round of U.S.-Iran nuclear deal discussions were actually pulled off yesterday. They were supposed to take place in Oman. What we do know, though, is that Iran has been trying to reopen the diplomatic channels via Qatar and via Oman to restart those discussions. So we'll see what comes out of that if potentially there is an off-ramp.
Joanna, is there a clear understanding at this point of what Israel's aims are, if it is to dismantle their nuclear program or engineer something of a regime change?
So the National Security Advisor didn't say that explicitly earlier on. What he did say is that the original objective was to ensure that Iran does not develop the means and the intelligence to go on to build a nuclear weapon. And all of the intelligence that had been collected in the run-up to the attack, they say, suggests that Iran was months, if not weeks away from developing those nuclear weapons. So the strikes, as we know, overnight on Friday, were targeting some of those nuclear sites. Isfahan, one of the main ones, but then also the deeper site that is one of the main hubs of nuclear and uranium enrichment is one called Fordo, and that is buried deep into the mountains. It's buttressed by almost 500 meters of ground. And so it's very difficult to get access to that. And the reason I bring this up is because it is unlikely that Israel will be able to take out that site without the assistance of the U.S. military. So at this point, it becomes a question of whether the U.S. themselves want to get entangled in this militarily or whether they will resume pushing for a diplomatic solution to it.
Jomana, thank you very much for that context. That is Jomana Bersecci. Now, Washington, President Trump continues to want a deal brokered with Iran, but he suggests one may not come before hostilities continue for some time.
Mr. President, can you give us a sense of what you're doing to try to de-escalate the situation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Kasia Klimanshinska, who leads our breaking news coverage in D.C. Kasia, great to see you this morning. We also had Trump putting out on Truth Social over the weekend that we will soon have peace between Israel and Iran. Many calls and meetings taking place now. What has been the U.S.'s role in this conflict so far?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Indeed, we saw right there President Trump talking to reporters yesterday as he was departing for the G-7 meeting in Canada. And, you know, he said that perhaps the two countries might have to continue to fight, might have to fight it out before there is a deal. Still, as you mentioned over the weekend, President Trump urged Iran to come back to the negotiating table, kind of threatening before it's too late. He also said in an ABC interview that the U.S. could get involved. He emphasized that right now the U.S. is not involved, is not helping Israel in the attacks, but that could change.
And Trump heading to Canada for the G7, Kasia, just how much is this meeting going to be colored by what we're seeing in the Middle East?
Yeah, this is Trump's first kind of international forum of his second term. However, from the first term, we know that he really doesn't like those. He doesn't like to look for a joint consensus. He's more about one-on-one talks. And so I think it will be difficult for those global leaders to find a joint stance on this conflict.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that in past instances. Kasia, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll catch up with you later. That is Kasia Klimanshinska joining us live from Washington, D.C. Let's now get you some other top stories that are trending on the terminal this morning. President Trump has directed federal officials to expand deportation efforts in the largest U.S. cities. In a Truth Social post, he cited Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. That move coming despite protests and court challenges. Elsewhere, China's retail sales growth unexpectedly accelerated to 6.4% in May. That is the fastest pace since December of 2023. The strong consumption may have been boosted by an annual shopping festival and government subsidies. Economists warning it might not represent a turnaround in sentiment. Japan's bond market roaring back to life, a surge of volatility taking hold. Analysis by Bloomberg shows that treasuries have become more sensitive to the moves in Tokyo. Fluctuations in Japan's $7.8 trillion debt market have soared to the highest level in 2 decades. Coming up, we're live from the Paris Air Show with Lease CEO John Plueger. That comes next as oil markets continue to decline after a 7% rally on Friday. We'll have a look at that and more coming up throughout the hour. You're watching Bloomberg.
We have plenty of contradictions to manage. We have a very strong backlog of signed contracts, customers expecting those aircraft to be delivered, so we have pressure on deliveries. We have a challenging situation for supply chain coming out of COVID, now with the uncertainties on trade and also on conflicts around the world. So we're pushing hard to be able to fulfill our obligations to our customers. They count on us, but it's an uncertain world.
An uncertain world for aviation. Airbus CEO Guillaume Faury speaking earlier to Bloomberg's Guy Johnson at the Paris Air Show. Pleased to say that Guy joins us now for another interview from Paris. Good morning, Guy.
Good morning, Danny. Yeah, thanks for the time. Thanks for bringing the Paris Air Show to your show. We were just hearing from Guillaume Faury there talking about some of the challenges, the myriad of challenges that this industry faces right now. If you want to get a good understanding of kind of what is going on from a supply-demand point of view, the people you want to talk to are the leasing companies. They are the kind of the market makers, you could argue, within the aviation sector, and have got a really good idea of what is going on. One of the best people to talk to is John Plueger. He is the CEO of Air Lease. Nice to see you, John.
Thanks, Guy. Nice to be here.
We just heard from Guillaume just a moment ago, talking about all the challenges that we face right now. You've got what is happening with the supply chain story. You've got the tariff story that we need to fold into that. We've got a Middle East conflict now that we're rolling into the to the story as well. And we've just had a major air disaster, a tragic air disaster out in India. Let's start with the latter. Any feedback coming from customers at the moment as to how they feel about the aircraft, what they think may have happened?
No, not really. I think most people are waiting to get further indication of exactly what happened, and I don't think that it'll take all that long. I think when both black box, I think the flight data recorder has been recovered. I don't think the cockpit voice recorder has been yet, but I think those two pieces of equipment will yield a lot more information, and what comes of that, people are just waiting to see.
One of the things I think probably that then comes off that conversation is what is going on at Boeing. We don't know yet, so we don't know how Boeing ultimately is going to respond. Kelly Ortberg, the CEO, is not here. He would normally be here. This was going to be his first Paris Air Show. He's obviously managing that situation. But it felt like Boeing was beginning to get its ducks in line.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you worry that this could be something that knocks it off balance again?
Well, Guy, it will depend upon the findings.
Sure.
If the findings implicate a problem with the aircraft, certainly that's a concern. But I will say that Boeing has been getting its act together. We had a most recent delivery forecast from them in November, and from that forecast, all of our deliveries this year have been pretty well spot on, and probably more importantly, the quality has been much better. So kudos to Boeing for getting that together, focusing on quality. I think it's bearing fruit, and I think we and our customers that are taking these airplanes will tell you that.
But another big hit would obviously knock them.
Yes,
quite significantly.
It would be a difficult development.
Okay, let's talk about tariffs.
Yes.
What is your degree of visibility right now? What are you planning for? How can you plan in this kind of environment?
Yeah, look, it's a tough environment to plan for because things are changing. You know, you read about tariffs being announced either by our administration and then reciprocity, but it's unfolding, it's up and down. And so from our perspective, we have no Airbus airplanes coming in the United States to deliver to U.S. carriers in our order book so far, so we're okay from that perspective. We're waiting to see what the European response might be, the EU response, if any, to a reciprocal tariff on Boeing aircraft going into EU countries. That remains to be seen. That's all trying to be worked out. I think July 9th is the deadline that both sides have set to try and reach an accord. It wouldn't surprise me if that was pushed out further. So I think it's just a matter of negotiation. As I told my board, it's premature to really overly react. But for the most part, we have very little, we at our company actually have very little exposure of airplanes going into EU airlines in our forward order book. We have a lot going to the Middle East, a lot going to Asia. So our exposure is relatively minimal.
Is there an argument there that says, you know what, Boeing needs to have some financial stability right
Absolutely,
now.
yes.
They need to get paid. And they're
Yes.
not getting paid because
Yes.
they can't deliver airplanes. Actually,
Yeah,
that's bad.
That's a bigger problem.
And the president's been quite supportive of Boeing. I guess
Yes.
that's quite a legitimate argument to go to the president and say,
yes,
you can't put tariffs on because our balance sheet, we need to have some stability
Clearly,
here.
yes.
This is going to mess with that.
Yeah. You have to have a strong Boeing, and don't forget that the president awarded the 6th generation advanced tactical fighter to Boeing for its development. You need a healthy Boeing to develop that airplane. And that was something that President Trump announced with a lot of pride. And that's what he wants. He's been quoted saying, I don't want to produce T-shirts. I want meaningful engineering. And that's airline aerospace. So any hindrance that would impede Boeing or Boeing's customer from wanting to take delivery of aircraft in Europe's a huge market for Boeing. And so Boeing has been able to go along okay, not delivering in airplanes to China for a while, but if there were a prolonged tariff that was implemented by the EU on importation of Boeing aircraft, again, depending upon how much, you're going to have most airlines really, even though it's their responsibility, you're going to have a lot of airline resistance to that. That's a more difficult challenge.
You price your contracts in dollars.
Yes,
we're starting to see a depreciation of the buck.
Yes, yes.
If that went further, I don't know, but people in the foreign exchange market are talking to me about 120 euro dollar. I'm hearing 130. Somebody said 140 to me the other day.
Yeah, that sounds a little high to me.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. Our contracts are dollar denominated. So when the dollar weakens, since 95% of our business is outside the United States, that's actually helpful for our leases.
Okay.
But it's not dependent. I mean, we've been trading in aircraft leasing industry, and largely aircraft transactions globally are all US dollars. And so that's become the common standard. So I really can't point to anything significant that's going to have an influence there over time.
Let's just talk about airplanes.
Yes.
Boeing's 777X.
Yes.
Still's not flying.
Right.
Orders are starting to come in.
Yes.
When are you going to?
Well, to be frank, we're watching the development of that airplane, and importantly, the certification in a very heightened environment of scrutiny and certification. We'd like to see a little bit more end user customer, because for us, it's not necessarily the delivery of the airplane when it first delivers. It's what do you do with the airplane after 8 years or 10 years? Is there will be enough of a secondary market of customers to be able to recycle that airplane, lease it to somebody else. So we like to see the market develop a little bit more.
Guillaume Faury's talking about a new narrow body 2030 onwards.
Yeah.
Is that too early for you?
That sounds really early to me, yeah. I mean, look, their order book is full. The Neo is a spectacularly successful product. It's got the market share, a larger market share now. You've heard them talk about the stretch A220. I think that sounds like it might be more likely.
Yeah.
But a whole new single
but not a stretch. They're not talking about a stretch, though. They're talking about basically, well, they are talking about a stretch, but they're not talking about a new wing or new engines.
Right, exactly.
Is that good? Is that bad for U.S. customers?
No, I don't think it's bad. Look, the airplanes are strong. They are themselves, and we've reached kind of the limits of current power plant technology in terms of efficiency. There are these, open rotor concepts now, like, the Rise engine and that sort of thing. That still has to be proven. There's still some certification issues on that, icing, blade penetration of the fuselage, that sort of thing. So I think that's still premature. So nothing quite yet on the power plant side. And on the airframe side, look, the market has spoken. It's strong. And it's hard to see a commercial incentive for either Boeing or Airbus today to really launch for a new airplane. There will be at some point this who's going to go first.
Yep.
But I think 2030 sounds a little early.
Great to see you, John.
Great. Thanks, Guy. Appreciate it.
Stopping by. Really
you bet.
John Plueger, CEO of Air Lease. Danny in New York, back to you.
Guy, thank you so much. A fascinating conversation and the widespread desire, I should say, for a strong Boeing to come back. Coming up on the show, the suspect in the killing of a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband has been taken into custody. That's in your front page news. We'll have you the rest of the headlines coming up on your brief. You are watching Bloomberg Brief. I'm Danny Berger in New York. Let's get you some front page news now. A look at what's making headlines on some of the top papers. First up, the New York Times leading with the man suspected of killing a Democratic state lawmaker and her husband in Minnesota has been taken into custody. 57-year-old Vance Bolter was arrested Sunday evening and has been charged with second-degree murder. He possessed a notebook that mentioned about 70 potential targets that included politicians and business leaders. Next up, the Financial Times, and indeed many outlets leading with this morning with the conflict in Iran and Israel. That entering a fourth day. Both sides traded strikes over the weekend and into this morning, with Iranian rockets hitting several locations in the greater Tel Aviv region today. Prime Minister Netanyahu has warned that the regime change could certainly be a result of Israel's attacks. And the Wall Street Journal reporting that Southwest Airlines is adding a new cockpit alert system, to help pilots avoid dangerous situations. The alerts are similar to ones in modern cars that detect other cars in blind spots or if a driver is about to back into another vehicle. It comes after the carrier recently experienced a number of close calls into U.S. airports. Now, a quick check on your markets this morning. S&P 500 futures continue to gain, up about 0.5% after declining more than 1% on Friday. The move that is sticking is that move higher in 10-year yields, up 3 basis points ahead of a holiday-shortened week and a Fed decision. Coming up, conflict rages on between Israel and Iran. We're going to bring you the latest on the tensions in the Middle East next on your Bloomberg Brief. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Danny Berger with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know on this Monday. No sign of easing. The conflict between Israel and Iran continues to day 4. President Trump says the two may need to fight it out before a deal is reached. Meanwhile, touchdown in Canada, world leaders gather in Alberta for the G-7 summit as geopolitical tensions intensify. And all of that ahead of a big week for central bank decisions, with the BOJ, the Fed, BOE all on deck. Sure, geopolitical disruptions becoming more commonplace, but you wouldn't know it from this oil market, down 0.7% this morning after gaining more than 7% on Friday, perhaps with no change to oil and energy output from Iran. This picture remains unchanged. You're also going to rally back in stocks after those fell yesterday on Friday, more than 1%. For your future session, about 4 hours away from the start of U.S. trading, NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, S&P up 0.4%. The move that continues to stick, though, are concerns about inflation and a repricing of this Fed. The front end moves up 2 basis points for your 2-year yield ahead of their decision this week. 10-year yield up 3 basis points at 4.4%. Let's now get you some stocks moving underneath the surface. Here with your stocks to watch is Joe Easton. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Danny. So really the big moves here in Europe today coming in the luxury and the car space. We're seeing the CEO of Renault, Luca De Meo, jumping ship. He's swapping Renault Clios for Gucci handbags, moving over to Kering, according to reports over the weekend. We have got confirmation from Renault that he's leaving the company. We haven't yet had Kering confirmed, but that is what the Bloomberg reports are saying, and others as well. Kering up 10%, Renault sliding around 6% this morning. Then, in terms of US Steel, getting approval on this takeover by Nippon. Nippon, the Japanese firm, committing to spend tens of billions of dollars in investments in the United States. In order to get approval on that, we had a joint statement from the firms on Friday. Does look finally we're going to get the seal of that deal in terms of the next few days at least. Then in your rating changes, Cisco is a new buy over at Deutsche Bank. They initiated on that stock 4 years ago, but this is the first time they've ever rated it by, at least on that analyst, and that stock gaining around 2%. It's all about the AI and the systems benefit given their exposure to the hardware on Cisco. That one rising as Deutsche Bank upgrades it to buy this morning.
Joe, really appreciate your coverage this morning. Joe Easton there. Let's now get back to our top story. Israel and Iran continuing to trade blows for a 4th straight day. Loud explosions have been heard in Tel Aviv. In Iran, Israeli strikes have targeted nuclear facilities, a natural gas plant, and senior military figures. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa host, Jomana Bersecci. Jomana, the fighting continuing throughout the weekend. What is the latest on the ground?
Yeah, no signs of de-escalation, Danny. The 4th day of conflict, strikes, counter-strikes between Israel and Iran continuing. Israel, over the course of the weekend, hitting over 80 sites around Iran. And the target of those sites were nuclear facilities. That we know from the IAEA that one of the key uranium conversion sites in Isfahan was targeted as well, sustaining quite a lot of damage, which would set them back several months in terms of how long it would take to restore some of the damage sustained there. So a big blow to their nuclear program, but then also a lot of damage sustained at some of those defense and military sites as well, in addition to the taking out of senior IRGC leadership, as we spoke about on Friday. The death toll in Iran, per the latest figures, at 224, including 6 high-level commanders and those nuclear scientists as well. Now, from the Israel standpoint, Iran have fired over 350 ballistic missiles and 100 drones towards Israel in the last couple of days of conflict. Most of those ballistic missiles have been intercepted, but some of them managed to penetrate the air defense system, causing as well damage to buildings. The death toll in Israel, the latest figure suggesting 24 people have been killed during the course of the last couple of days of conflict. So no signs of de-escalation. The Israeli Prime Minister is saying that this is an existential threat and they will keep going. They will strike at every site and every target of the Ayatollah regime. The Iranian side also saying that they're not going to let up and they would not think of stopping with their responses until Israel stopped their attacks on Iran.
Well, Jomana, to that point, are there any diplomatic channels open at this moment? Are there any negotiations for something that looks like a ceasefire?
Well, President Trump put out a post on Truth Social yesterday saying that he hopes that there could be a deal between Israel and Iran. He used the word deal. He said they should make a deal, will make a deal. Many calls and meetings are taking place, which suggests that the diplomatic channels are actually being worked. And we know that over the course of the weekend, Iran also spoke to Qatar and to Oman to help restart some of those diplomatic channels and also perhaps restart those U.S.-Iran nuclear discussions. Remember, the 6th round of those talks were set to take place on Sunday yesterday. They didn't proceed given the events over the last 24 hours. But if there is an off-ramp for de-escalation, it will have to involve the U.S. because the only way that you get out of this is to secure the objective of stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but at the same time, the U.S. avoiding a full military engagement. And the way that they do that is by getting Iran to agree to a U.S. deal.
Jomana, thank you so much for your coverage this morning. That is Jomana Brzezinski. Now, as Jomana mentioned, the response from Washington has been to try to put pressure on Iran to arrive at a deal, but one might not come before the conflict rages on for a while longer, according to the president.
Mr. President, can you give us a sense of what you're doing to try to de-escalate the situation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
Bloomberg's Kasia Klimanshinska joins us now from Washington, D.C. Kasia, the president is also on his way to Alberta for the G7 meeting. How much is this conflict now going to cover the meeting of the world leaders?
Hello, thank you. Yes, we just saw President Trump there talking to reporters yesterday as he departed the White House on his way to Canada, where he will start meeting global leaders today. It's interesting that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is traveling with him, but so is the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent. And we know that there is more than a dozen of global leaders waiting for Trump in Canada, hoping to talk to him, not only about the conflict between Israel and Iran, but also about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and possibly about trade, hoping to get some trade deals done.
What's the likelihood that this can result in trade deals? Kasia, just what you're saying is an incredibly busy agenda for the president and for the secretaries joining him.
Yes, so for example, Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico will be there, eager to discuss trade with President Trump. So will be the leaders of Japan, the EU, South Korea, for example. They all are facing a threat of higher tariffs starting next month.
Okay, Kasia, we'll catch up with you after the G7 to see what comes of it throughout the week. That is Kasia Klimanshinska in Washington, D.C. Now, it's also a big week ahead for global monetary policy. The Bank of Japan's decision comes on Tuesday, the Fed on Wednesday, the Bank of England on Thursday, among others. For more, let's go to Bloomberg's Zoe Schneeweiss, who leads our economics coverage from Europe. Zoe, I think the statistic is 6 out of the 10 most traded currencies will see their central banks deliver rate decisions. The concentration, obviously, among the Fed, but what has the most potential to surprise these markets?
The most exciting one for me actually is the Swiss rate decision. Switzerland is one of the few central banks this week, and you just went with the data, with those statistics. The statistic that I found fascinating was it's 18 central banks accounting for 40% of the world economy. So the Swiss meet on Thursday, and they are likely to cut to zero. So putting them just on the brink to negative rates is one of those that actually is a huge headache for banks, because if you've got negative rates, you at least can pass on those costs to clients. If you've got positive rates, obviously you're making money anyway, but zero puts you in no man's land, and that is one of those really interesting and maybe painful decisions for central bank.
Well, perhaps we put Japan to the side for now, Zoe, but besides Japan, we have a Fed that's likely to hold. You're talking about the Swiss likely to cut. Just how big of divergences are we starting to see among these central banks around the world?
Overall, this is a week where we will be seeing mostly holds. As you mentioned, the Fed is going to hold. The Bank of Japan, even if you put them aside, is going to hold. The Bank of England is going to hold. The cuts we're going to see are few and far between. So Switzerland, I already mentioned. We've also got Sweden. The Reichsbank is likely to cut. And then in the Philippines, there also is likely to be a cut. But otherwise, hold is one of those prevailing situations we've got right now. And that's all back to Trump and those trade wars that just put so much uncertainty over central banks, so they just don't want to make a decision right now.
Yeah, fair enough. So perhaps a hold when it comes to the Fed. But Zoe, the more exciting thing might come from the SEP, the Summary of Economic Projections. What are we expecting there?
Yes, anything with the U.S. with a lookout on what could happen with the Fed is an exciting thing here. As we know, economists are only expecting a Fed cut in the autumn. As we know, Trump has repeatedly said he wants the Fed to cut right now. So given that also Jerome Powell's term is going to be is ending. All those things just play together and make watching anything regarding the Fed very exciting.
It's so true. We're going to get the dots for 2026. How much of that is going to change when Powell is no longer at the helm? Zoe, thank you so much for that excellent coverage. That is Zoe Schnee-Weiss. Coming up, oil erases its gains this morning as the conflict between Israel and Iran intensify. Rapidan's Bob McNally will join us next on your Bloomberg Brief.
If you're talking about really extreme scenarios, we've considered a case where even if only very temporarily oil prices could get, for example, above $200 a barrel. If you're just looking at historic relationships of the sensitivity in changing price versus the amount of supply that could be disrupted in that scenario. But I would stress that neither is that, as I say, a base case, nor is that something that inherently would be very sustainable if it were to occur.
Plenty of people out there gaming out the worst case scenario for oil disruption, but that we have not yet seen. Indeed, we saw some of the geopolitical tension priced into the oil market on Friday, gaining some 7%. But that only put prices to the highest since around March, and oil falling again this morning. Joining us now is Bob McNally, founder and president of Rapidan Energy Group. Bob, so wonderful to see you this morning. Let's just start with the price of oil. What is and isn't priced into it right now?
Good morning, Danny. You know, the oil market has gotten pretty inured to the risk of a major oil market disruption. If you go back to September of 2019, when Iran hit the Abqaiq stabilization plant, 7 million barrel a day facility, we had the largest open on that Sunday afterwards in the crude oil markets in Asia. And after a while, it reversed because the damage was light and reversible. And you had the Russian invasion, Israeli-Iranian blows last year. So oil markets have learned scary things happen, but we don't see a oil market disruption develop. And so we're off a little bit today because while the conflict is expanding beyond military targets to economic targets on both sides, and that's concerning, the market is saying, you know what, I'm still seeing Hormuz flow. I don't see disruption to any of those stabilization plants or gas oil separation plants or terminals. So maybe this is just more of the same. I think we're getting a little bit of more of the same complacency here this morning.
Bob, is that complacency misplaced? Should this be a market and others, and indeed your clients, that should be prepared for more disruption, be it the Strait of Hormuz or other energy facilities?
I think we should be building more risk premium into the market, and we will. Why? Because while sprawling and extensive and audacious, The Israeli attacks and now the Iranian responses are spreading beyond military facilities. We're up to well over now a dozen, I believe, Israelis killed, hundreds of Iranians. We're hitting energy facilities in both countries, albeit not ones connected to the global oil and gas markets, domestic ones. But this is a sign that this conflict, and it's likely to go on. Israel has a long list of targets it needs to hit on the nuclear side now that it's established air superiority. So it's going to go on for a while. It's expanding, and when it expands, it's getting closer to becoming a regional conflict with all that entails. So, yeah, I think a little more risk certainly is deserved.
Just out of curiosity, Bill, what is that little bit more of risk? Brent crude trading around $73 right now.
Yeah, I think we'd easily could put in another $3 to $5 of risk. I think if we're Iran to threaten Hormuz flows of oil or LNG or threaten attacks on Gulf infrastructure, again, as it attacked at Abqaiq in 2019, just the threat of that, I think, would put another $3 to $5 a barrel. And here's the deal. Iran, of course, needs to export, and Iran can't win in a conventional battle with the United States. However, risking an oil price spike is really the only leverage Iran ultimately has over Israel. President Trump is deathly afraid of $120 oil. And so in some ways, Iran's only card is to threaten that spike, to try to generate U.S. and international pressure on Israel to desist. And there's a real risk Iran, if it's pushed into a corner, if the attacks don't stop, may feel compelled to play that card.
Bob, what should be the U.S. administration's role in this then? As you say, this is a president who came in as he was campaigning in day one with his objective of bringing energy prices down, of seeking to ease inflation. If that is the risk, what should this administration be trying to do in order to alleviate it?
Well, and again, I worked on a Gulf War, working for President George W. Bush in the White House some 20 years ago. So I think, number one, you have to be deterring Iran against even thinking of attacking Gulf energy production and flows. Even though we're a net exporter of oil, that would translate immediately into a devastating price spike here for consumers and the world. You don't want that. You got to warn Iran. If you say if you do that, it'll be the last thing you do. You have to make sure, of course, you're working with Saudi Arabia, UAE, to ensure that they're adequately and safely flowing as much oil as they can or they're willing to. And finally, you have to protect those Gulf facilities. Abqaiq stabilization plant, I'll mention it again, probably the most valuable piece of real estate on planet Earth, literally. Were you to subtract the Abqaiq stabilization plant from the world, you'd lose more GDP than just about any other few square miles I'm aware of. You've got to protect those facilities if Iran decides to play that card. And then finally, working with our IEA partners, International Energy Agency partners who hold strategic stocks, Japan, Germany, other countries, to make sure we're ready, willing, and able to use those. It's really unfortunate, Danny, that we've sold down about half the SPR for no good reason. But that being what it is, we've got to be ready to use what stocks we have left if there is a disruption.
Bob, is there a real concern that perhaps some of the sway that the U.S. has in this conflict has ebbed? You've seen it with Israel, with the fact that the U.S. tried to discourage Israel from attacking before the negotiations with Iran. Is this a U.S. that's coming from a weakened position in its ability to influence the region?
You know, I don't think so in this case. I think President Trump, unlike his predecessors, really doesn't want to see Iran develop a nuclear weapon. And I think Iran is very close to developing a nuclear weapon. So the only difference between, I think, President Trump here and Israel is that President Trump would truly want, and maybe he believes there is a diplomatic option, that Libya model, dismantle the centrifuges and then go to Tehran, establish an embassy, sell them Boeings, but end that nuclear program in a way Muammar Gaddafi did. I don't think the Israelis are expecting Iran to do that. But I think President Trump, if that diplomatic option were to fail, I think he's willing to accept a military option to prevent Iran from crossing over. I do think that makes him very different than his predecessors, willingness to use force, not to acquiesce to an Iranian nuclear capability.
Bob, if it is more of a military solution, and if we do see a prolonged conflict that targets not just nuclear facilities from Iran, but something that tries to engineer a regime shift, you mentioned Libya, we've seen Syria, Yemen, all have this type of environment where what you get afterwards is fragmentation. If that's something what the long term of Iran looks like, and I know it is very soon to be calling for something like that, how do you understand how energy and that sort of thing develops in the region?
You know, if we imagine a regime change in Iran, considering that Iran has the second most pro-American population in the region after Israel, and that Iran historically has been a great friend of the United States and Israel, and there's millions of Iranians in the United States and so forth. I mean, we're talking about the world's, second largest gas reserves, third largest oil reserves. I mean, if Iran were to become a normal country where its government was like its people, Danny, I can think of few things that would be more positive for global growth and peace than that, including energy stability. You would reduce terrorist risk and violence risk to oil production and flows across the region. You would be able to take gas and oil out of the stands, out of the former Russian republics, and get them out of Russia and send that out to global oil markets. So, I mean, it may be a very tumultuous and difficult and painful conflict if it comes to that. But in a normal Iran with a normal government is one of the few most positive things I could think about.
Hey, Bob, we're going to have to end it there. Please come and join us again soon. It has been far too long. Your insights are incredibly valuable. Bob McNally of Rapidan Energy Group, thank you so much for your time this morning. Now, coming up, we're going to get you set up for your week ahead with a marathon of central bank decisions and a G7 meeting. This coming from Handelsblatt ahead of that G7 meeting in Canada, that the EU is ready to accept a flat 10% U.S. tariff if it is under consideration. Again, a 10% flat tariff from U.S. to the EU. That coming from Handelsblatt. There's going to be discussions likely just about that in Canada throughout the week. We'll bring you what's coming up next on your Bloomberg Brief. It's your Bloomberg Brief. I'm Danny Berger in New York. Let's get you set up for your trading week this week. A busy one. We're going to start off with the Bank of Japan rate decision on Tuesday. That same day, we'll also get U.S. retail sales. The Fed will announce its rate decision on Wednesday, and then it's the Bank of England's turn on Thursday, with U.S. markets closed for the Juneteenth holiday. Because of that, again, a very compressed week to the start of it. Tuesday, Wednesday, a lot of central bank rate decisions. When it comes to your individual movers, we are seeing U.S. steel moving higher, as Nippon Steel has indeed secured approval from the President Trump to buy the steelmaker. Those shares up 5% in the pre-market trade. Victoria's Secret Barrington Capital has built a stake in the lingerie retailer, and it plans to urge changes to its board and strategy. We had seen Victoria's Secret try to adopt a poison pill strategy to avoid a takeover of 2.5%. Sarepta Therapeutics, that one down this morning, 35%, reporting a second patient death from acute liver failure after being treated with the firm's gene therapy. Let's get you a check on oil as we head to the end of the hour, because it continues to fall this morning, down 7% for WTI crude. It did rise as much as 5% at the open, that quickly unwinding. Bob McNally from Rapidan saying we're not pricing in the risk that there could be some serious disruption. He thinks oil prices should be somewhere between 5 to 6% higher should we see any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz or other energy facilities, that Iran backed into a corner, that this is their card that they can play to try to get the U.S. involved for brokering a truce. All right, that's it for your Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance. We'll take things from here. This is Bloomberg.